Alrighty, folks, here we are. Topic 1. So, I am slowly going through all of my recorded lectures on YouTube, and I am revamping them, blah, 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 trying to make them shorter. So, with this particular one, this is the first one I'm doing, making it a little shorter, a little more concise, but I'm not going to include all of the information that's in the textbook chapter. All right, so you still have to read. This is not me telling you everything that's in the book, all right? I'm going to go over some of the things that I find to be more important because I have a PhD, all right? I likely have a more comprehensive understanding of the content than you do and know what you really need to hear. But it's still important that you read the textbook. All right. So today is a quick primer for the whole class. And we're just going to talk about what is law enforcement and then some myths, because these myths are really ruining everything for everyone. All right. So what is law enforcement? Let's see. All righty. Oh, these animations, man. They're crazy. Okay, so there are several purposes of the law enforcement folks in this country and probably other countries as well. One of the main things is maintaining order, right? That is one thing that you really notice here in the States. The cops here are very effective at maintaining order. And what we mean by that is they try to limit public disturbances, right? So loud parties. Have you ever had the police called because you were having a rager at your house? Well, someone maintained order upon you. So that is maintaining order. Also, protests, right? When people are out there protesting without a license or without permission, the cops come in, they maintain order. Or even if you have permission to protest that day, the cops are there, make sure that nothing gets out of hand. Nobody starts throwing Molotov cocktails or rocks at each other. So have you ever seen those videos of protests where people you have the one protest, maybe it's like a Trump protest, and then you have like these Antifa people, and they're like, no, right? And everybody is protesting against each other, and the cops just like in the middle. They're like, everybody please stay calm. That's maintaining order, right? And sometimes when those things get out of hand, cops get into their riot gear, they start spraying the mace, they start, getting out their batons. That's maintaining order. Also, one of their purposes is to protect citizens. And you usually do that by arresting criminals, by preventing crime, by using force sometimes. And then one thing that we forget about, that cops do a lot of, is serving citizens, right? Have you ever had a cop come and help you unlock your car because you locked your frickin' keys in the car on a summer day? Maybe I have done that. Maybe a cop has helped me before. They also investigate crimes, right? And I think that's probably one of the things we see the most in the media, right? These cops are going after some deranged killer, and they're putting together all the clues, and they're going to find out who committed the crime. And then they also uphold the laws, right? The other day, I was in New York, which is where I live, by the way. This video, I should probably tell you, this video is gonna be for people at one university and people at another university as well, because I teach at two universities. I'm a proper professor at one university and an adjunct at another because I like money. And I like teaching, but I also like money. And I need to build a new deck in my backyard. So that's why I'm also adjuncting. But not more than what's allowed in my contract at work. Anyways, they uphold the laws, like my contract. So one time I was driving from the University of New York, had just passed a new law that says you can't have handheld phones in your hands while you're driving. Anyway, so you know how like sometimes you get on the phone and maybe you're talking to your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your best friend or an enemy. Maybe you're talking to an enemy. Anyway, so you're talking on the phone. I get into my car. I start my car. But the problem is, right, it takes like a while for the Bluetooth to like kick over, right? And I have an older car, so like the Bluetooth is all janked. all right? And I start driving. I got my hand on my phone, talking to my wife. Yeah, what are we going to eat tonight? I don't know. I don't want to eat a kale salad again. Yeah, but what kind of salad do you want to eat? Well, maybe we should make a salad with a balsamic. I don't really like balsamic vinegar. And we're talking. And next thing you know, woo! Campus police officer, pulls me over. And he's like, hey, as of yesterday, you're not allowed to talk on your handheld. You got to wait for the Bluetooth to kick in. And so why were you talking on your phone? And I was like, well, officer, to be honest with you, I had no idea about this law, but I trust you, and I appreciate that you pulled me over. And he's like, all right, let me just run your license real quick. And I was like, here you go. Comes back, he's like, look, you don't have any problems on your record. You were driving the speed limit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a verbal warning and let you go. Please remember just to wait until your Bluetooth kicks in. And I was like, thank you, officer. And I went on my merry way. So at that point, the officer went and upheld the law. But now that particular example, right, shows you that like these purposes can overlap per incident, right? That would also be considered protecting citizens from my, driving around, not paying attention, but it could also be considered maintaining order, right? What if I was driving around like a crazy person because I'm on the phone talking about balsamic salad dressings and upholding the law? So in one instance, in one incident or citizen interaction, I have, the police officer has upheld the law. By the way, the difference between an incident and a citizen encounter or citizen interaction is an incident might involve myriad citizen encounters, whereas a citizen encounter is usually defined as 2 to 3 exchanges between the officer and one citizen. Right? So what if I had someone in my car that was smoking a blunt? I don't know. The police officer might talk to me and then might talk to that person too. So that incident would have 2 citizen interactions, if you cared. So one of the biggest myths in policing is the old crime fighter image, right? We have this view that the police are there to fight crime, fighting off the bad guys. But, in reality, that's really not what they do most of the time. In fact, only about a third of the time do they fight crime. Right? Or they run around like Bad Boys 3, shooting at people, commandeering vehicles. Yeah, they don't do that hardly ever. What they do most of the time is they're driving around, they're pulling people over, they're talking to people, they're writing tickets and citations, but they don't fight crime like we see in the media or in the news or anything like that, right? Also, then there's this thin blue line thing. So I'm sure you all have heard of the thin blue line, but the way that it's supposed to be seen is that you have, imagine a society of a bunch of maniacs, a bunch of crazy, depraved people who just want to murder and stab and attack. And then there's another segment of society, the good people of society, the people who are just going about their day, working, having a cup of joe or whatever. And then these depraved people want to just attack the normal or not the normal, but, the law-abiding people. And then in between the maniacs and the normals, I don't know if that's a word to use, but anyways, I did, is the thin blue line of police officers protecting the weak, protecting the sheep from the wolves, right? And it's not really that bad. Yes, the police are there to protect us. That's one of their purposes. The police do heroic things many times. They do sometimes prevent these maniacs from killing us, but it's not like this constant thing, right? But we tend to think, that's like a myth about it, that the police are sort of every day they're on their way to a murder scene, or every day they're shooting at people, or they're commandeering vehicles, or fist fighting some person trying to hold up a 7-Eleven or something. It's just not true. Sometimes police officers hardly come in contact with felonies. Have you ever noticed when there's like some big thing that popped down, there's like a gazillion police officers there? Well, part of it is backup, but other part of it is also like These guys are like, oh, wow, I haven't seen anything cool in like 3 weeks. I want to go see what happened here. Right? They're pretty much just curious. They also want to be there. They also want to see what happened. You don't need a gazillion officers for backup when there's a dead body in the street. So they hardly encounter felonies, and when they do, it's like an exciting thing. And it's kind of like the same as when your professor cancels class like 2 hours before and you are not wanting to go to class, and your professor's like, hey, folks, I'm throwing up. I'm going to have to cancel class. You know, I think they encounter felonies about at the same rate as you encounter your professor throwing up and canceling class the day of. And more importantly, most police officers only fire their guns during training, right? You have to go through a certain amount of training. I think some police agencies have like this rule. You have to send a certain amount of rounds through your gun per year. You have to fire your gun a certain amount of times to make sure that it's working, right? Because if you never fire your gun, something rusts, something go wrong, and now you're in a high intensity situation. You have to use your gun, and all of a sudden it's a misfire. Not what you want. Or you have a hang fire. Is that what they call it? A hang fire? It's when you pull the trigger, nothing happens, but then like 3 seconds later, all of a sudden the bullet fires. I think that's called a hang fire. But anyways, I'm sure there's a gun nut listening to the this video. You can just post in the comments and tell me if I'm wrong. My wife tells me I'm wrong all the time. All right. Where do we get these myths from? Well, 3 sources really. Most important is movies and television. Right? I mean, who here watches cop shows or cop movies? Right? It's ridiculous, man. You watch Blue Bloods, man. These guys are using force like a gazillion times. If a police officer used as much force as some of these detectives in these cop shows, dude, they'd be fired. They'd be gone. All right? Like, it is insane. They would also be in, like, administrative leave. They'd be seeing psychologists, right? Just imagine the trauma of killing, like, 30 people in your police career, right? Most police officers never kill anybody. Hardly would they kill more than 5 people throughout their career, and that's if you've been policing a very dangerous jurisdiction, right? But the movies and television, right? They show officers as these almost like action heroes, right? That are constantly running around, shooting, being violent, action, badassery. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't police officers like that, or police officers don't ever do that, but they overhype it. Same with the news, right? The news is not gonna have a story that says, well, today, Officer Martin pulled over Dr. Cohen for talking on his phone. And then he gave him a warning. So, and anyways, at the National Zoo, there's another panda born. No. They are going to get the stories that are gruesome, that are going to catch our attention, that are going to scare us into watching more news. If it bleeds, it leads. Right? That is the motto. So the news, like, and that's another thing, BT Dubs. When you watch the news and you're like, the whole world is going to shit, okay? It's not at the same, it is, but not at the pace that the news makes it seem, right? The news is not going to do anything boring, right? The news is there to say, hey, look at this crazy stuff that happened in the world today. And so if we watch the news constantly, it makes us feel like everything is imploding around us at a very fast pace. But in reality, the implosion is happening way slower. And I'm really just hoping that everything hasn't imploded by the time I have to retire. So if y'all can just keep everything together for the next 40 years, I'd be very happy. And if the economy is nice and high when I'm retiring, that'd be even better. So come on, Gen Z. Come on, Generation Alpha or whatever. Keep it together for me. And then also the police feed into these myths, right? Because if these myths exist, and we live in a democratic society, well, what do you think the democratic people, or the people of this democracy want? If the news and television create this crime fighter myth, what do you think people care about? How much crime is being fought. And so the police catch on to this, and the police say, oh, hey, look at all these crime and arrest reports. They release these things all the time. They brag about it. They put it in their budgets. They use it sometimes for why they need more money. Look at all these arrests we made. We need more resources. We need more officers. Now, I'm not saying the police do this because they're nefarious or anything. I'm just saying if the public wants to see the numbers, then they're going to provide the numbers. Right? It's not like the police are these nefarious people that are, we're going to feed into this myth, right? They don't benefit much from that. Now, they do benefit in some way. For instance, how do you report to the public, right? Just imagine if the police walked around in their jurisdictions, like in their little beat. So you have a police officer walking around in their beat, and they go and they know all the troublemakers in their beat. Right? And then they go and they start talking to these troublemakers. Hey, man, I need you to chillax, all right? I understand that you're probably really high right now, but if you can just go get high over there, right, I'm not going to bother you. Just stop. Like, I don't care if you're drunk. I don't care if you're high, but just stop bothering people. Like, stop making a scene in the freaking 7-Eleven, right? Stop yelling at people walking past the laundromat. Like, if you can just be chill, I won't bother you. And that's actually a great approach. Like, we know that when police officers do that, when they build that rapport with the frequent flyers in their jurisdictions, it does actually reduce crime and it makes life easier. And it also creates trust among other people in that environment, right? So if I live in a neighborhood and I see this cop sincerely trying to get this drunk to stop being a bother, instead of just arresting them, right? Instead of just seeing the police officers coming in and like ruining someone's day and then leaving, instead I see this police officer coming in, they're trying to figure out what the root of the problem is, and then they're addressing that problem so that I can have a better time here. Right? That's going to have a much better overall effect on how I view the police, how I view my safety, right? And the legitimacy of the police. But the problem is, how the hell do you report that to people? How do you put that in numbers and spreadsheets to report that to people? So what is easy to report? What is an easy way to show that you're doing your job? Well, look at all these arrests we made. In fact, look, there's a boatload of arrests. We need more officers. Can we get a bigger budget next year, please? That's how that goes. So it's not like their fault or anything. It's not like they're being nefarious. They're not purposely doing this. It's just like, oh, this is a good way that works for us to get money and for the people to like us. Well, what are some of the problems with the crime fighter image? Well, it ignores the importance of peacekeeping and order maintenance, right? So when we see, like, how many times have you seen a police officer, they pull somebody over and you're like, man, these resources should be spent on fighting actual crimes. Well, actually what we find out, like, think of crime or think of society as a garden, right? Now you have a garden. Like, I love gardening because, I've gotten old. I'm in my 30s, and now I find joy in gardening. All right. So I have a beautiful garden, and the thing is, if I'm not constantly in my garden removing those tiny little weeds that come up in between my mulch or my rocks, if I leave them for 3, 4, 5 weeks, you guys ever seen weeds that have gotten out of control when they're growing, right? It starts taking over the yard. Then it gets harder to pull them out. Your whole yard looks ugly. And then those weeds start sprouting seeds and they pop all over the place. And then more weeds are coming up. Well, order maintenance is the same way. If people don't see you pulling people over for going 6 over the speed limit, or stopping people for being on their phones while they're driving, well, then other criminals are going to be like, oh, well, the police don't seem to be too hardcore here, right? So I'm going to see what happens if I stand up on this corner and I start posting up trying to sell drugs, right? So the thing is, when the police do order maintenance, when they focus on order maintenance, right? It sets a standard of like, oh, nothing flies here. I can't even talk on my phone here. I'm not even going to try to post up. So that's the thing. By picking out the weeds when they're tiny, you're going to have a yard that looks a whole lot better. And it's easier too, right? Taking a tiny weed out doesn't even require like one of those screwdriver looking thingies, right? You just pull it out. That's what order maintenance does. And if the public only worries about crime fighting and then they see these officers doing order maintenance, they might think these officers are stupid or they're not doing their jobs or they're lazy or whatever. And so that's one of the problems with the crime fighter myth. Also, it sets weird expectations of the police. Right? Oh, the police need to be doing this. Oh, the police need to be doing that. They need to be working out. They need to be strong. They don't need to worry about de-escalation. They need to get better at shooting. We need to give them more guns. They need more technology. They need drones with machine guns attached to them. Another problem with all these myths and the news and media is that this what we call the CSI effect, right? And the CSI effect is when we expect the police to have like, CSI level evidence for the smallest crimes. Like, oh, do we have DNA evidence for this petty robbery? Do we have fingerprint evidence for this instance of vandalism? Right? And then when we don't have DNA evidence for a robbery, the juries will not find those people guilty. But the problem is DNA is not always usable. It's not always there. And it's really expensive to process it. Like, very few police agencies, if any, have their own DNA processing facilities. It's expensive, dude. And so you can't just run DNA for everything. But the problem is, when you watch CSI, when you watch Law & Order, when you watch all these ridiculous cop shows, there's always DNA, there's always some sort of crazy evidence, and that's simply just not realistic. And so we call this the CSI effect, when juries begin to have unreasonable expectations of evidence. Thank you for all the myths for doing that. And with that being said, I'm going to leave you all. Make sure to read the rest of the textbook, because there are some things in the textbook that I did not cover today. But thank you all. And remember, it's all about my retirement. Chill vibes.